A company with no stores sold a smartphone every 3 seconds by convincing millions of customers to buy a phone they'd never touched. Now they're bigger than Apple in dozens of countries, and most people in the West have never heard of them. In 2010, 8 people in a tiny Beijing office decided to take on Samsung and Apple with almost no money, no factories, and no retail stores. Everyone said they were crazy. China already had dozens of smartphone companies. The market was crowded and competitive. Samsung and Apple were spending billions on marketing and had decades of experience. What chance did a startup have? But these 8 people had a plan so unusual, so different from how every other phone company operated, that it changed the entire consumer electronics industry. They wouldn't spend money on advertising. They'd let customers spread the word. They wouldn't build expensive stores. They'd sell online only. They wouldn't mark up prices to increase margins. They'd sell at cost and make money elsewhere. They wouldn't chase specs. They'd focus on software experience. Within 4 years, Xiaomi became the most valuable startup in the world, worth $46 billion. Within a decade, they were selling more smartphones than Apple in multiple markets. Today, Xiaomi makes everything from phones to electric cars, smart home devices to robots. They're the 3rd largest smartphone maker globally and are expanding into over 100 countries. But here's what makes their story incredible. They did it by completely rejecting traditional business models and proving that you could build a massive tech company by actually giving customers what they want at prices they can afford. In this video, we're going to break down how Xiaomi went from zero to tech giant the unconventional, strategies that let them compete with companies 100 times their size, and why their approach threatens established players who've relied on high margins and brand prestige for decades. The story begins with a man named Lei Jun. In the 1990s, Lei Jun founded Kingsoft, one of China's first major software companies. He spent 16 years building it into a successful business and became wealthy. By 2007, he'd essentially retired in his late 30s and was working as an angel investor, funding Chinese tech startups. He was comfortable, financially set for life, and could have stayed that way. But Lei Jun was restless. He'd watched Apple launch the iPhone in 2007 and saw how it was transforming the mobile industry. Android launched in 2008, offering an open-source alternative to Apple's closed ecosystem. Lei Jun believed that smartphones were going to be huge in China, a country of over 1 billion people, where most couldn't afford iPhones that cost $800 or more. What if someone could make a phone with flagship features but at a fraction of the price? Chinese phone companies already existed: ZTE, Huawei, Lenovo, and others. But they mostly made cheap phones with terrible software, slow performance, and poor design. The phones worked, barely, but nobody was excited about them. Lei Jun wanted to do something different. Make a phone that was genuinely good, with great specs and software, but sell it for much less than competitors. In April 2010, Lei Jun gathered 7 co-founders in a small apartment in Beijing. This team was unusual. They came from different companies with different expertise. Some had worked at Google, Microsoft, and Motorola. Others came from Chinese tech companies. They had skills in software, hardware, design, and operations. Lei Jun convinced them to join him in starting a smartphone company, even though none of them had ever built a phone before. They called the company Xiaomi, which means little rice in Chinese. The name was chosen because rice is humble, essential, and nourishing. They wanted to build products that were essential to daily life and accessible to everyone. The logo looked like the characters Mi, which also stood for mobile internet, and Mission Impossible, reflecting their ambitious goals. Here's where Xiaomi's strategy got interesting. Most phone companies follow a predictable model. Spend 2 years developing a phone in secret. Spend hundreds of millions on marketing to build hype. Launch in retail stores with trained salespeople. Sell at high margins to recoup development and marketing costs. Samsung, Apple, LG. Everyone did this. Xiaomi did the opposite. First, they decided not to start with hardware. They started with software. They took Android, Google's open source mobile operating system, and heavily customized it. They called their version MIUI, pronounced MIUI. MIUI added features, changed the design, and improved performance. Xiaomi released MIUI as a free download for people who wanted to install it on their existing Android phones. This was brilliant for several reasons. It cost almost nothing compared to developing hardware. It let them build a community of users before they even had a product to sell. These early users became beta testers, giving feedback on what worked and what didn't. Xiaomi released updates every single week based on user suggestions. Users felt like they were part of creating the product. This built incredible loyalty. Within a year, hundreds of thousands of people in China were using MIUI on their phones. Xiaomi had built a passionate fan base without spending a dollar on advertising. These fans became advocates, telling friends about MIUI and creating buzz online. When Xiaomi finally announced their first phone in August 2011, people were already excited. The Xiaomi Mi 1 was shocking. It had a dual-core processor, which at the time was cutting edge. It had a great screen, good camera, and excellent build quality. The specs matched or exceeded flagship phones from Samsung and HTC that cost $600 to $700. Xiaomi's price, 1,999 yuan, about $310. People thought there was a mistake. How could a phone this good be so cheap? Lei Jun explained Xiaomi's business model in interviews. They weren't trying to make money from hardware. They sold phones at or near cost, meaning they barely made any profit per device. Instead, they'd make money from services, apps, accessories, and the ecosystem. If they could get millions of people using Xiaomi phones, they could monetize through software and services later. The phone was the Trojan horse to build a user base. This model only worked if they kept costs low. Xiaomi saved money by selling online only, no expensive retail stores or salespeople. They saved money by not spending on traditional advertising, relying instead on word of mouth and social media. They saved money by limiting the number of models they sold, focusing on just a few phones rather than dozens like Samsung. This simplified manufacturing and reduced inventory costs. But there was a catch. Xiaomi couldn't make enough phones to meet demand. In the early days, they used a flash sales model. They announced that a limited number of phones would go on sale at a specific time on their website. When the sale started, phones sold out in seconds, sometimes in under 60 seconds. Hundreds of thousands of phones were gone. If you didn't get one, you had to wait weeks or months for the next sale. This created incredible hype. The scarcity made Xiaomi phones feel exclusive and desirable. People bragged about successfully buying one. Those who couldn't get them talked about trying next time. The flash sales generated media coverage and social media buzz. Every sale was an event. Critics said Xiaomi was artificially creating scarcity to drive hype, which was partly true. But Xiaomi also genuinely had supply chain constraints as a young company. Without massive manufacturing capacity, the strategy worked spectacularly. By 2014, Xiaomi became the #1 smartphone brand in China, overtaking Samsung. Think about that. In just 3 years, a startup with 8 employees became the top phone brand in the world's largest smartphone market, beating companies that had been in business for decades. Xiaomi sold over 60 million phones in 2014. They were valued at $46 billion, making them the most valuable private tech startup in the world at the time. Lei Jun became a celebrity in China. He was compared to Steve Jobs, partly because he dressed similarly in jeans and black shirts for product launches. Xiaomi product launches became massive events with thousands of fans attending. Lei Jun would present new products with enthusiasm and humor, engaging the crowd. These launches were live-streamed and watched by millions. Xiaomi had turned product releases into entertainment. But Xiaomi wasn't just making phones. They were building an ecosystem of connected devices, smart TVs, fitness trackers, air purifiers, rice cookers, electric scooters, robot vacuums, security cameras, light bulbs, you name it. Xiaomi applied their low-cost, high-quality approach to every category. A Xiaomi smart TV with 4K resolution cost half what Samsung or Sony charged. A Xiaomi fitness tracker cost $15 compared to $100 for a Fitbit. Here's how they did it. Xiaomi often didn't manufacture these products themselves. They'd find small Chinese companies that made good products but didn't have branding or distribution. Xiaomi would invest in these companies, help them improve the product, integrate it with Xiaomi's app ecosystem, and sell it under the Xiaomi or Mi brand in exchange. The products had to meet Xiaomi as quality standards and sell at low prices. This ecosystem strategy created what Xiaomi called the Mi Home, a smart home where all your devices work together through Xiaomi's app. Your phone could control your lights, your security camera, your robot vacuum, everything. And because all the devices were cheap, people could afford to fill their homes with Xiaomi products. This increased lock-in. Once you had several Xiaomi devices, you were incentivized to buy more because they all worked together. Xiaomi's community approach was also unique. They treated customers like partners. On their forums, users could suggest features, vote on what to prioritize, and see their ideas implemented in weekly updates. Top community members were invited to special events and given early access to products. This created a sense of ownership and loyalty that money couldn't buy. The company also stayed lean. While Samsung and Apple had hundreds of thousands of employees, Xiaomi kept their team small. By 2015, with billions in revenue, they had only around 8,000 employees. They outsourced manufacturing to partners like Foxconn. They outsourced logistics. They kept overhead low. This allowed them to maintain their low-price strategy while still being profitable. As Xiaomi grew in China, they started expanding internationally. India was the first major target. India had over 1 billion people, mostly with low incomes, and was hungry for affordable smartphones. The market was dominated by Samsung and local brands, but there was room for a new player. India went crazy for Xiaomi. Within 2 years, Xiaomi became the #2 smartphone brand in India. By 2018, they were #1, overtaking Samsung. As of 2024, Xiaomi remains one of the top smartphone brands in India. They achieved this despite patent battles with Ericsson, tax investigations by the Indian government, and nationalist sentiment against Chinese brands. Xiaomi succeeded by building local manufacturing in India, creating jobs, and pricing products aggressively. Xiaomi expanded to other markets, Southeast Asia, where they became hugely popular in Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Europe, where they entered Spain, Italy, France, and other countries, Latin America, Africa. By 2024, Xiaomi operates in over 100 countries. In many markets, especially developing countries, Xiaomi is a top 3 smartphone brand. But there is one major market where Xiaomi has minimal presence: the United States. There are several reasons for this. The US market is dominated by Apple and Samsung with strong carrier relationships and different consumer preferences. Americans are used to buying phones through carriers, not online directly from manufacturers. Xiaomi's online-only model doesn't fit American shopping habits. There are also geopolitical issues. Chinese tech companies face scrutiny in the US over security concerns. Huawei was essentially banned from the US market. Xiaomi faced similar pressures, including being added to a US investment blacklist in 2021, though they successfully sued to be removed. Not entering the US limits Xiaomi's growth, but it hasn't stopped them from becoming massive globally. By 2021, Xiaomi became the #2 smartphone brand globally by shipments, briefly overtaking Apple. They've since traded the 2nd and 3rd spots with Apple depending on the quarter. Samsung remains #1. but Xiaomi has established itself as a major player. However, Xiaomi faced serious challenges as they grew. The low-price strategy that made them successful also created problems. When you sell hardware at cost, your profit margins are tiny. For years, Xiaomi's net profit margin hovered around 5% or less. Compare that to Apple's 20 to 25% margins. This meant Xiaomi had to sell way more devices to make the same profit as competitors. The plan to make money from services and ecosystem didn't materialize as expected. Chinese consumers were used to free or cheap software and weren't willing to pay for many digital services. Xiaomi made some money from ads in their MIUI system, pre-installed apps, and their app store, but it wasn't enough to offset the low hardware margins. Their smart home ecosystem helped, but those products also had low margins. Xiaomi also struggled with brand perception in China and developing markets. Being affordable was a strength, but in developed markets like Europe, being cheap was associated with low quality. Xiaomi was seen as a budget brand, not a premium one. This limited their ability to sell higher-priced phones with better margins. When they tried to launch premium flagship phones to compete with Samsung and Apple's most expensive models, consumers didn't take them seriously. The flash sales model that created early hype eventually became a liability. Customers got frustrated with not being able to buy products when they wanted. Xiaomi responded by opening offline retail stores, first in China and then globally. But this contradicted their original low-cost model. Stores are expensive. Suddenly Xiaomi had rent, staff, and inventory costs they'd avoided for years. This put pressure on margins. Competition intensified. Chinese rivals like Oppo, Vivo, and Realme copied Xiaomi's playbook, making good phones at low prices. They competed aggressively, especially in markets like India and Southeast Asia. Huawei, before being hit by US sanctions, was a fierce competitor in China. Samsung and Apple, while more expensive, offered brand prestige and ecosystem advantages that Xiaomi couldn't match. The smartphone market became brutally competitive with dozens of companies fighting for share. Xiaomi's dependence on smartphones was risky. By some estimates, over 60% of Xiaomi's revenue comes from smartphones. The global smartphone market stopped growing around 2017 and has been flat or declining since. People keep phones longer before upgrading. The technology improvements between generations are less dramatic. This meant Xiaomi needed to find new growth areas. Xiaomi's response was diversification. They doubled down on the Internet of Things, or IoT, connected smart devices for homes. By 2024, Xiaomi claims to have the world's largest consumer IoT platform with hundreds of millions of connected devices. They've sold over 10 million smart TVs, millions of robot vacuums, scooters, and countless other products. The IoT segment now generates about 25% of Xiaomi's revenue, reducing dependence on phones. They also entered the electric vehicle market in 2021. Xiaomi announced they'd invest $10 billion over 10 years to build electric cars. Lei Jun said this would be his final startup and he'd stake his personal reputation on it. The Xiaomi SU7, their first electric car, launched in China in 2024. It's positioned as a competitor to Tesla's Model 3, but cheaper. Early reception was positive with strong pre-orders. Whether Xiaomi can succeed in the incredibly competitive EV market remains to be seen, but it shows their willingness to bet big on new categories. Xiaomi has also pushed into premium phones more seriously. Their flagship models now cost $800 or more and feature cutting-edge specs, excellent cameras, and premium materials. They've partnered with camera company Leica to improve photography, similar to Huawei's partnership with Leica and Vivo's partnership with Zeiss. These premium phones help improve brand perception and increase margins, though they still represent a smaller portion of sales compared to mid-range models. The company has invested heavily in research and development. Xiaomi now holds thousands of patents and spends billions on R&D annually. They're developing their own chipsets to reduce dependence on Qualcomm. They're advancing battery technology, camera sensors, and display tech. This vertical integration is similar to what Samsung and Apple do. Controlling more of the technology stack, Xiaomi has also explored new business models. In some markets, they've partnered with carriers to offer subsidized phones with contracts, adapting to local market norms. They've experimented with financing options, allowing customers to pay in installments. They've expanded services like Xiaomi Cloud Storage, music streaming, and video content. These efforts to diversify revenue are ongoing. What makes Xiaomi's story remarkable is that they proved you could challenge established giants. By rethinking every assumption about how the industry works, everyone said you needed massive marketing budgets. Xiaomi spent almost nothing on ads and relied on community and word of mouth. Everyone said you needed retail stores. Xiaomi sold online only 4 years. Everyone said you needed high margins to fund innovation. Xiaomi sold at cost and found other ways to make money. Xiaomi showed that consumers wanted great products at fair prices more than they wanted premium branding. In markets where people couldn't afford $1,000 iPhones, Xiaomi gave them $300 phones that did 90% of what iPhones did. This wasn't about making cheap knockoffs. It was about efficiency, cutting out unnecessary costs, and passing savings to customers. The company also demonstrated the power of community-driven development by involving users in the product development process, taking feedback seriously, and releasing frequent updates. Xiaomi created loyalty that traditional brands struggled to match. Customers felt heard and valued, not just marketed to. Xiaomi's success sent shockwaves through the industry. Other Chinese brands like Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, and Realme adopted similar strategies. The entire Chinese tech ecosystem shifted toward Xiaomi's model of good specs, low prices, online sales, and community engagement. This forced even Samsung and Apple to reconsider their pricing and features. The smartphone market became more competitive and consumer-friendly because of Xiaomi. Lei Jun's vision was vindicated. He'd bet that there was a different way to build a tech company, one that prioritized user value over short-term profits. By 2024, Xiaomi is a massive conglomerate worth tens of billions of dollars. Lei Jun himself became one of the richest people in China. But unlike many tech billionaires, he remains actively involved in the company, presenting at product launches and engaging with the community. The story of Xiaomi is the story of how smart strategy can beat superior resources. When Xiaomi started, they had no money, no factories, no brand recognition, and no experience making phones. They competed against companies with billions in the bank, decades of expertise, and global distribution networks. By every conventional measure, they should have failed. But Xiaomi succeeded because they didn't play by conventional rules. They invented a new playbook based on efficiency, community, and value. They were willing to make less profit per device to build a massive user base. They were willing to be patient, investing in long-term growth rather than short-term gains. They were willing to listen to customers and iterate rapidly. Xiaomi proved that in the modern internet age, you don't need massive marketing budgets if you have great products and genuine word of mouth. You don't need retail stores if your online experience is good. You don't need high margins if you have volume and an ecosystem. These lessons have implications beyond smartphones. Any industry dominated by high-margin incumbents is vulnerable to a Xiaomi-style disruption. The company's expansion into electric vehicles will be a major test. The automotive industry is even more capital-intensive and competitive than smartphones. Legacy automakers like Toyota, Volkswagen, and GM have deep expertise. New entrants like Tesla, BYD, and NIO are already established. Can Xiaomi's playbook work in cars? Can they deliver great EVs at accessible prices and build another massive user base? The next decade will tell us whether Xiaomi's model is truly universal or only works in specific categories. What's certain is that Xiaomi has already changed the tech industry permanently. They've shown that there is an alternative to the Apple model of premium products at premium prices, and the Samsung model of something for everyone at every price point. The Xiaomi model is maximum value, minimum cost, maximum community engagement. It has a model that resonates especially in developing markets where billions of people are coming online for the first time. For these customers, many of whom are buying their first smartphone, first smart TV, or first electric scooter, Xiaomi isn't a budget brand. It's the brand that made technology accessible to them. It's the brand that treated them like partners, not just consumers. It's the brand that proved you don't have to be rich to have nice things. That's the emotional core of Xiaomi's success. In a world where Apple and Samsung market luxury and status, Xiaomi markets inclusivity and value. In a world where tech companies often seem distant and corporate, Xiaomi feels like a community. In a world where innovation often comes with a premium price tag, Xiaomi makes innovation affordable. Lei Jun and his team took on an impossible mission and somehow pulled it off. They built a company that now touches hundreds of millions of lives across the globe. They forced giants to adapt and made markets more competitive. They proved that starting with nothing, you can still change everything if you're willing to think differently and work relentlessly. Xiaomi isn't perfect. They face challenges, criticisms, and an uncertain future in some respects. But their story is a reminder that in business, there's no single right way to do things. The established playbooks can be rewritten, the giants can be challenged, and sometimes the small startup in the Beijing apartment can become the company that outsmarted everyone.